Ul'dah, Gridania, Limsa, Lominsa, the three main city-states in Final Fantasy XIV. Since A Realm Reborn, the amount of accessible city-states has increased. Although we never got Al'Amigo as anything other than a dungeon, one city-state, veiled in endless mystery, opened its gates as the game's first expansion, Heavensward, launched in 2015. I speak, of course, of Ishgard. If you've been watching this series for a while, you should already know that Ishgard had a presence in 1.0 as well. In fact, the whole reason we got Heavensward was because of the seeds planted in 1.0. Ishgard was located in almost exactly the same place in 1.0 as it is today, north of Camp Dragonhead in Kurthus Central Highlands. When 1.0 launched, Ishgard was scarcely mentioned, but when it was described as an overly paranoid nation that had locked its gates and refused to let anyone in. Men and women of Ishgard found themselves locked out when the gates closed, or the gate wouldn't even open for its own citizens. This led to the formation of smaller hamlets like Owl and Falcon's Nest, literally built by Ishgardians out of desperation as their city-state had locked them out. Ishgard and Kurthus was often brought up as a mysterious and desolate place, and had two connection points, one from North Shroud and one from Mordona. The Mordonan route was used for lumber exports for the Holy See, and the Shroud route was used for import of fur through the Fur Line. As a player, you were not expected to access this area until you were close to the level cap, around the level 40 mark. This didn't stop a young Lukiel Bravestone from exploring in his low 20s. Most players would first discover Ishgard through the Shroud route. All that really stood in your way were a few high-level boars that would easily kill a level 20 gladiator, and they did. Many times. But at some point, possibly through luck, I made it past the boars by basically making a run for it, knowing that a loading screen would kick in if I just crossed an invisible line in time. And I did. The screen faded out, loading wheels spinning, and then the sound of wolves in the distance. I've made it to the mysterious lands of Kurthus. As I move forward, the path slowly starts to open into a wider area, and in the distance, I see it. Dark spires shooting up from behind mountains far, far away. It's mesmerizing, but I know that the journey to whatever those spires belong to is going to be long and hard. Not knowing the lay of the land, I cling to the path and walk, desperately looking for a netherite. I would not find one for quite a while yet. Kurthus had a very distinct design. Where the copy-paste terrain was painful to look at after a while in the other zones, Kurthus terrain appeared more unique, varied, and interesting. This might be why its and Mordona's maps were kept almost exactly as they were in A Realm Reborn, while the other zones got broken up and remade entirely in A Realm Reborn. It wouldn't take long before I encountered buildings and windmills, but also high-level Ahrimans, wolves, gubus, and the like. Kurthus was hostile through and through. After walking with my heart pounding for what seemed like hours, I finally spot the glow of a netherite in the distance. I've made it to Camp Glory, a camp that would see complete devastation in the Calamity. I decide to follow the road further north. It's dark outside and there's not a single player character nearby, but I press on. After a short while, I make it to a bridge. This is GRIFFIN Crossing, later becoming the setting for the battle on the big bridge with Gilgamesh in A Realm Reborn. This would be the first of two bridges connecting the Central Highlands to the Eastern Lowlands and Western Highlands. For a new player, this site alone was quite the adrenaline rush. You're progressing into what felt like uncharted territory. I pass tall mountains, deep valleys, and lakes before arriving at Camp Dragonhead. Ironically, the camp is located in such a way that the spires are obscured from view by a big mountain. Sunrise is imminent as I return to the road and continue due northwest. And as I make my way up a hill and around the mountain, she reveals herself. The city-state in the sea of clouds, Ishgard. The massive castle-like structure looms in the distance, a series of bridges, the only connection with the rest of the land. Eagerly, I run towards the gatehouse, thrilled that I've made it to a city-state long before I've made it to the appropriate level, only to be told by the gatekeepers that Ishgard is closed until Halone sounds her call. Other players had similar experiences when discovering Ishgard. 1.0's MSQ scarcely mentioned Ishgard, but it was there, and it was obvious to everyone that the city-state would open soon, maybe through a patch, but history would crush that idea pretty quickly. As Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 fell apart and the new dev team stepped in to clean up the mess, the original MSQ was abandoned almost immediately. The lore that existed about Ishgard was still there, but it would not be developed further in 1.0's lifetime, with a few exceptions. The Dragoon questline would further explain the plight of Ishgard and its troubled past and present with Dragonkind, and Aurum Vale and Zemail Darkhold would provide even further information about Ishgard's troubles. The more information that was provided, the more players wanted to enter the gates, but the Gates of Judgement would not budge. Not even while Dalamud screamed in the skies. For many, ending the game near the Gates of Judgement felt right. It felt like the future. The gates wouldn't open in Tanaka's 14, but if Yoshi P's able to turn the ship around, maybe he will be the one to open the gates. This would be both a blessing and a curse for the dev team. Blessing because they knew what to focus on in the future, but a curse because 1.0 had chained them, forced their hand, to open the Gates of Judgement as soon as possible. Because as the legacy players returned to Eorzea, Ishgard would eventually be on everyone's mind once again. Before A Realm Reborn relaunched, some players almost expected Ishgard to be the fourth city-state in line with Limsa, Gridania, and Ul'dah. Discussions ran high about the future of the Holy See. Would it even still be there after the Calamity? Ishgard did not heed the Eorzean Alliance call to arms. Did it fall into the Sea of Clouds? As A Realm Reborn launched, 1.0 players were faced with a familiar sight. Ishgard. It was still there. However, it had gone through a few changes, most of them applying to the bridges. In 1.0, Ishgard was connected to the Kurthan mainland through a mass of land naturally protruding from the central highlands, with 3 massive bridges filling the gaps in between. In A Realm Reborn, the city-state is connected by what appears to be 3 smaller bridges with shorter landmasses in between. This brings us to the second major difference, the distance. Ishgard appears closer in A Realm Reborn, and the bridges therefore appear shorter than they did in 1.0. This is most likely because of the compression of the original Kurthus map. The bridges are shorter, but more detailed than their 1.0 counterparts. But the path to Ishgard is inconsistent in A Realm Reborn. In the duty, the Steps of Faith, it appears as a single massive bridge going from the Gates of Judgement to Ishgard proper. Ishgard is visibly closer to the mainland here, with steel and stone vigil in their correct positions, but the bridge is way shorter and has no landmasses in between them. Well, you might think, it's just a duty. Obviously they didn't want it to go on forever, now did they? And I was almost ready to make that conclusion myself, until I looked at the A Realm Reborn artwork for Ishgard. Notice how the bridge looks even shorter here than the duty, but once again, only one continuous bridge. I'm therefore more inclined to believe that the dev team wanted a shorter bridge, but the original overworld map did not allow for that redesign. Therefore, having 2 different versions of Steps of Faith, one with landmasses in between, in the overworld, and one continuous bridge in cutscenes, duties, and artwork. Which version is canon? Let me know in the comments. It's an impressive sight to behold regardless, and was as mesmerizing as the 1.0 model when it reappeared in A Realm Reborn. The A Realm Reborn MSQ was now acknowledging Ishgard more seriously, now referring to it by name more often, and as you climbed in levels, it started to become more and more evident that the stage was being set for an Ishgardian expansion. And in late 2014, the announcement was made. 4 years after the release of 1.0. 4 years of longing, confusion, and frustration. The confirmation we had been waiting for. Ishgard was going to be the main focus of the next expansion. For many 1.0 players, this was the last link to the 14 they knew. A promise given to them that was never fulfilled. But just like that, the dream of entering the Gates of Judgement to walk the streets of the Holy See was soon to become reality. And in June 2015, Final Fantasy XIV Heavensward was released. Still to this day, I find myself in the Central Highlands, looking over at Ishgard in the distance, covered in snow. And I think about the young level 20 Lukiel standing almost exactly where I'm standing now, dreaming of entering the Forbidden City-state, engulfed in clouds and endless mystery. It's sad, but in a good way. Sad because I had yet to realize how far away Ishgard really was. Sad because at that point, I didn't know the game in its current state was going to end in just a year. But in a good way, because I'm still here. I'm in Kurthus, and the gates are open. Thank you for watching this episode of Remnants of a Realm. Leave a like if you enjoyed and subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments how you felt when you first discovered Ishgard, be it in 1.0 or A Realm Reborn. I'll be back next month with another episode of Remnants of a Realm. See you then, and may you ever walk in the light of the crystal.